Vegas Video Network Studios, just steps from the Las Vegas Strip. It's Top of the Food Chain. And now your host, he's 1 part Mohawk, 2 parts attitude, and a touch of what the It's Al Mancini.
And even without Scott here, I still get thunderous applause. That makes me feel so warm and fuzzy inside. Either that or the Sailor Jerry I just had. Not quite sure. Welcome to Top of the Food Chain. I am your host, Al Mancini, the food critic who has done more single-handedly to destroy the idea of going incognito into a restaurant than all other food writers combined. Yes, I just try to sneak in looking like this. Doesn't quite work. Oh man, Scott's usually the one that laughs at my bad jokes. Scott is not here, but we'll get to that in a second. Welcome to Top of the Food Chain. You're here on the Vegas Video Network, the home of all your great Las Vegas programming. If you're into gambling, if you're into Las Vegas real estate, my condolences. But if you're into gambling, real estate, drinking here in Las Vegas, just about anything that goes on in Las Vegas, comedy, comedians, we've got shows to handle them all. And you can find them all at vegasvideonetwork.com. You can find them all on YouTube, on iTunes, in both audio and video versions. We are on Roku, if you subscribe to that. We are on live stream, if you want to watch us live. Hopefully you're already watching us live, so I don't have to tell you about that, but always look for our programming on live stream. And it's all rebroadcast every night except for the dirty guy. But the rest of us who know how to mind our P's and Q's and F's and S's, more importantly, we are all on KSHP 1400 AM all night long every Friday night. So just tune in on your AM radio. Wow, this is so much harder without Scott here to encourage me. I feel so lonely. If you've got a question for a future show, and we do have a couple questions that people have sent us via email, you can send them. We'll be getting to them in just a few. But those are food@vegasvideonetwork.com. Just shoot us an email there. If you want to phone in, it is 866-966-4599. I'm saying that slowly because a lot of you people driving your cars, it's hard to remember. 866-966-4599. Okay. And what else? Any other ways people need to get in touch with us? Of course, me. You can follow all that I do, this video series, other video series, my porn star adventures, my blog, everything I do, the great restaurants I eat at. I write all about it because I have nothing else to do, and all of that is at almancini.net, or follow me on Twitter. It's almancinivegas. Before we get down to business today, and we will be talking port wine. Oh, chat room. People, get in the live chat. Damn it, how do I forget the chat room? That's the most immediate thing. The immediate gratification is usually what I'm all about. So get in the chat room. You got to log on, but we've got questions about port wine we'll be looking for today. So if anybody has any questions about port wine or about the porn stars I've been hanging out this week, but that's another issue. Get in the chat room. Now, before we get down to business, we want to thank our sponsor, Bread and Butter. Great little bakery and sandwich shop over on Eastern Avenue. These guys are phenomenal. Chris Herron running the show over there. There's so much incredible food going on over there that I can't believe. Chris just told me they're going to start having an omelet bar coming out over there, an egg and omelet bar. That's in the works, so I recommend you look forward to that. And he has a pop-up coming up. It's going to be a donuts and coffee pop-up. Chris, what day is that? Hold on one second. I forgot what day that was. Give me a second. I really lose everything when Scott's not here. I really do. I'm glad this is professionalism at its best. And that's just a message from a porn star. Let's get to this one. I should have a more up-to-date iPhone. Oh, this Saturday, like I said, I had it. The Donut Peddler and Grouchy John Coffee. So it's going to be a little pop-up on Saturday over there. Chris, I'm really sorry. I'm usually much more professional than that. The worst thing is going to be when this starts buzzing later in the show. Anyway, Bread and Butter, our wonderful sponsor. Once again, the 5th week. I can't believe he's sticking with us. We'll look in and see whether it happens in week 6. So now, as I always say, konnichiwa, my brother Scott. We really need a sound effect of crickets kind of chirping right there. Scott is in jolly old England, And I don't know if he took Jacob's wife, Sally, who's from England, with him or not. And I don't know. Jacob's been very quiet about what's going on. So I don't think we'll be hearing from him. But I'll just pretend Scott is here, and I'll go through the usual what went on this week. Well, Al, what happened this week? Well, Scott, I was shooting a video, a weird project I'm working on, very big, can't talk much about it, but I had to spend 10 hours a day with John Curtis, and I'm about ready to shoot myself. Nothing I could imagine worse than getting a new job where I would have to work with John Curtis full-time in addition to the book. It would be really scary. But I also want to send a shout-out while we're here to Christian Dolius, a chef guy that I met through Facebook originally. He's friends with a lot of my chef friends. He's got this Cutthroat Culinary, if you see this shirt I'm wearing. He's running a T-shirt company. I guess I botched the lead there. About 6 months ago, I asked anyone out there that had a T-shirt to send it to me because I had run through my entire T-shirt wardrobe. I just worn a different one every week because I didn't want you to see me in the same shirt twice. Very Kate Middleton of me, I think. And I had run out, and I asked people to send me new T-shirts, and my parents were the only ones who responded. Now, like 4 or 5 months later, actually, Christian Dolius of Cutthroat Culinary sent me a bunch of shirts. So we're adding them to the rotation here. Yes, and look, it's very cool. He's kind of a chef that runs a fashion company, so it's culinary themed, but it's rock and roll. And that's the plug, because if you send me free stuff, I will give you one plug. That's it, Christian. If you want me to wear your shirts every week, get in touch with Scott about sponsoring the show. But what I do like about Cutthroat's stuff is a lot of times when I find really cool designer products, I can't wear them because I eat for a living and I am very large. But these were made by a chef, so he's used to people being large, and you can actually get things and you can fit into them. So check out Cutthroat Culinary. They're good guys. And even my fat ass can fit into their shirts. One more thing that I would normally talk to Scott about, and I want to get it out of the way, it's pretty important to me, and especially to my fat ass, is I may be a little thinner the next couple times you see me. I'm going on sort of a starvation diet starting on Monday, and it is for a cause, and I wanted to mention it. We're in political season. I'm not going to get political with you guys right here, but everybody's talking about entitlements and how we can cut the budget, and unfortunately, a lot of our less fortunate friends and neighbors are being left out, and people talking about taking their money away. If you're watching this show, you probably eat well. You've probably never been on food stamps, and if you have, you're probably not doing that right now. And maybe you don't know what it's like to try to survive on $4.05 a day. I'll be doing it next week, Monday through Friday. It's part of a program called the SNAP, S-N-A-P, experience, being sponsored by my good friends at 3 Square. It is daring people, fat people like me, or just people that have good food who eat well all the time, to try to live on $4.05 a day for 5 straight days and try to do it nutritiously, which is one hell of a challenge, and I'm not looking forward to it. You can't take free food, which is really the bad thing about it, because I could live on $0 a day and just eat at my friends' restaurants. But go to 3square.org and check it out. If you have any opinion whatsoever on food stamps and on what it's like to live off those programs, I dare all of you to try it. I'll be writing about it in Las Vegas City Life, and it's a hell of a challenge, and I don't look forward to it. It'll also mean that next week you will not see me with any of this fine bottled water, which you can't afford on $4.05 a day. I will not be drinking any of the wonderful alcohol that my friends bring me, because you don't get that if you're living on food stamps. So we're also going to have to see whether I can handle a show sober next week. So, wow, thanks, 3 Square. You gave me a whole other challenge. Anyway, don't want to bring anybody down. We still want to talk about the finer things in life. And we are going to be talking about the finer things in life. Port wine. We will be talking to my friends Jeff and Rhonda Wyatt from Marche Bacchus. Marche Bacchus. Say it. We'll get them to tell you how to say it correctly right after this.
Traditional media believes that after about 3 minutes, you'll tune out. Most Vegas media companies think if it doesn't jiggle, you won't tune in. At the Vegas Video Network, we think both are wrong. The Vegas Video Network is the first and only live online broadcast network that specializes in insider news and expert views about Vegas. We combine great storytelling with the ability to watch when and where you want on your computer, mobile device, or television. Discover the real Las Vegas. Visit VegasVideoNetwork.com.
And welcome back to Top of the Food Chain. I again am your host, Al Mancini. And we are here today with the proprietors of Marche something.
Bacchus.
Bacchus, Bashu.
Call us SOBs.
God bless you.
Find us, we don't care.
Gesundheit. We don't know. One of my favorite restaurants. And of course, Jeff's been a guest here before. We love to have you guys on because you're not only an incredible restaurant, but also probably one of the cooler wine distributors here in town, or wine retailers, I should say, here in Las Vegas. And you're just hardcore winos, right?
Mm-hmm. We are.
We appreciate that.
And foodies.
Absolutely.
So how do you pronounce it?
Bacchus. We follow the French enunciation of the term. So, but like I said, you can call us anything you
Even
want
though Bacchus was the
Greek god of
the
wine.
Roman god of wine, right?
And through the Greek act.
But-
yeah.
Then they all just bastardized it.
Everyone does it.
Well, Marche Bacchus was started by a French couple, so they always pronounced it Marche Bacchus. So we kind of kept the French tradition. But of course, Bacchus is still correct.
We're
either
from
way.
New Orleans. There's a street named Burgundy, which is actually pronounced Burgundy. So it's a disaster.
Well, I worked near Houston Street.
Oh, yeah.
Houston Street in New York. So seriously, people, I'm not John Curtis. You can pronounce things any way you want around me. Nobody's going to complain. We're here to talk about port wine. I always say I don't like to do shows about wine because it's one of those things that no matter how much you know, there's always somebody that knows 10 times more. And knowing how little I know, everyone out there knows 100 times more. But the other thing about wine is I could probably do a show on wine 5 days a week for a year and really just scratch the surface of what there is to know about wine. So I try to keep it, more simple. We do a show on Scotch, or we'll do it, but today I want to talk about port wines because next Friday is National Port Wine Day.
Absolutely.
And I want to know how to get drunk next Friday. Actually, it's during my week of not drinking, so but I want those people to know how to get drunk next Friday.
We can help you with that.
$4.05.
Yeah, $4.05.
It doesn't go far, doesn't it?
Well, in some ways it could, because I'll tell you, getting to my background on port wine, I was first introduced to port wine when I was working at CBGB on the Bowery, New York City, big punk rock club. But when we opened the pizza place bar during the day, it was pretty much heroin addicts and winos that came in. And they loved port wine because we had cheap-ass port wine. I don't know what we were charging for it at the time, but probably you get a glass of it for as much as you get a beer. And it was strong, and they could get pretty lit up, and that was my first thing. So I thought port was like wino wine.
Right.
Was it white port or was it red port?
I don't remember.
It's got alcohol in it, right?
Yeah.
It was strong.
It was strong, and people liked it. And then years later, actually, I think it was from my wife's graduation, we went to a place called the Chart House. It's a big chain.
Sure, absolutely.
We're at a Chart House on the Hudson River in New Jersey, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. And we ordered like Death by Chocolate or triple chocolate cake as dessert. And the waiter said to us, and we were really kind of foodie newbies at the time, and the waiter said, "Oh, do you drink port?" I said, "No, we don't drink port, but they're paying, in-laws are here, And he said, "Look, if you're going to have chocolate, there's nothing better than a good port." And I started drinking port then with chocolate, which, seriously, people, if you think you can improve on the orgasm, I'm saying chocolate and port, it's pretty up
Decadent.
there.
It's up there.
And so I started really trying to research port. And it's one of those things that no matter how much I learn about it, I feel like there's 20,000 other things I haven't learned.
Absolutely. It's very
That's the
confusing,
fun of it.
unfortunately, and that's part of the problem with port, too.
Can we start with the definition of port? I'm going to ask you to correct me, and then I'm going to throw the rest of it to you. As I understand it, port is a wine. It starts off its life as a wine. And as it's doing its wine thing, normally in wine, sugar turns into alcohol.
Correct.
So the sweeter the wine, the lower the alcohol content. If you'd like a nice white Zinfandel, then you're not going to get a good buzz.
Absolutely.
And if you like a nice dry wine, you're going to get a serious buzz. Well, port's different because halfway through the fermenting process, they take something very close to brandy, which is a spirit made from grapes, and it's a hard liquor made from grapes, and they throw it into it, and it stops the fermentation. So it stays sweet, but then you've got the hard liquor added to it, so you still get a really nice buzz. Is that pretty much it?
That's pretty much it, actually. The funny thing is that port is actually produced in Portugal. There's American ports, but obviously they're not the same. sort of like American champagnes.
Well,
champagne.
yeah, we'll get into that momentarily.
But it's interesting enough that even though they're produced in Portugal, it actually we have the French to thank for that, because there was a treaty in 1703 during wartime that actually prohibited the French from shipping their wines to Britain, to Holland, and to Germany. So they had to look for new sources of wine, and they looked to Portugal. The problem
The British,
the
Germans,
exactly, and the Germans and the
right.
Dutch, exactly. And but the problem is that the distances to be traveled are quite significant. So when they were shipping these large barrels of wine, they oxidized. So to stop the oxidation process, they actually introduced these brandier spirits, which created port wine, which the British really liked and really started to order in large quantities.
Could you explain? I'm going to take you on a tangent, and I
Sure.
hate when people do this, and I'm doing it to you. All my wine friends love to smell something and look at it and go, "I think it may have oxidized." That's like the big complaint. People, if you're looking for an excuse to send wine back, like that's the biggest BS line. But the som can't yell at you, and that's usually what people will lie if they decide, oh, it's a $300 bottle of wine. I don't like it. You can't say you don't like it. So if you want to be full of crap, you can say, I think it may have oxidized. That's
pretty much the line
right.
that a lot of people use.
What's it mean?
What it means is that an excessive amount of air has actually infiltrated the bottle, usually due to the fact that, like, the cork is a little dry. And once the air infiltrates the wine, it reduces, oxidization is actually a process that reduces the amount of fruit that's in the wine. So what you're getting is basically a wine that's dull, lifeless, doesn't contain fruit, has these off-putting notes, actually. But it's not corked. It's not like the wet cardboard that you smell in a bottle that's contaminated by TCA. It's basically something that just really doesn't have a lot of fruit in it. The mouthfeel isn't, you don't feel the glycerin. It feels dry to you as well. And it's very off-putting.
Okay.
So, but you're right.
So,
a lot of people use it.
Yeah, so
they
there's
don't know what it is.
the big BS argument for returning wine when you don't know what you don't like about it.
A couple of times myself.
Okay, so they were worried about, of course, now we're not talking about bottles of wine, we're talking about barrels of wine coming a very long trip from Portugal back to the UK. I'm sure in the olden days that took a long time. There was no airliner or anything. So to keep it from oxidizing, you throw in this something similar to brandy.
Exactly.
Right?
And that brandy basically it's a fortified product, basically. It's spirits. So what it does, it stops that the fermentation process, and then also stabilizes the wine, which is less impenetrable to oxygen at that point. And so
I'm often less penetrable by oxygen after a lot of
drinks.
wine or
Exactly.
after a lot of brandy.
You're like a
Excuse
good port.
Me too.
I like
Me
good
too.
wine, yes.
Actually,
That's going to be my kickoff for next week's show.
Mine's
Like a good
chartreuse.
Yes.
But but that's also the part of the process that makes these wines very good, oxidization. And to compare and contrast, vintage ports only spend between 2 years and a little less than 3 years in wood, where that oxygen is actually penetrating that wood. That's
Yeah,
the
we're
reason.
going to actually break down, hopefully. Actually, it's a good time to move on, but before I move on
Sure,
to the different types of ports and how that works, what's interesting about port to me, as a non-wine connoisseur or oneophile or whatever you call it, as somebody who doesn't know a lot, it surprises me that ports can be made out of either red or white grapes, and they will end up either being red or white port. So port is more about the process than the grape. Most wine is about the grape, correct?
Correct. And this is more about the process. You're absolutely right. And the interesting thing is that sometimes when we talk about these wines later, it'll make a little more sense. Sometimes you'll also see that they'll try to make a tawny port without having to go through the aging process by blending white port and red port. But the basic difference is white port is a blend of up to six different varietals that are produced in that Douro region of Portugal, which is on the northwest side, excuse me. And also ruby ports at the same time, very short aging process, but at the same time lend themselves to this blending process that makes this bastardization of a tawny port, if you will.
So for it to be called port, like so many things in Europe, if you're going to abide by European rules, which Americans don't care about, but if you're going to abide by them, it has to come from the Douro region, the Douro River Valley
Exactly.
of Portugal, and you can go look that up online. It's a river that runs kind of across Portugal,
Basically,
right?
absolutely.
And but there's no definition of what kind of grape you have to use. You can use. I've heard there are up to 100 types of grapes.
Well, actually, there are 5 that are typically
Well,
used.
that's very far from 100.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm very wrong on that one.
No, but the 2 primary ones are 2 grapes called Touriga Nacional and Touriga Fonquesa. And the Fonquesa actually is probably the predominantly used grape in the Douro region for port. And then in the white port style, there's 6 varietals, which is typically known as Verdejo in other regions. But there comes under a different name, actually.
Now, when you're looking at your bottle of port, does it tell you? Do you have to know? Do you have to care about what grape is used? Is this something that a connoisseur will worry about? What type of grape is used?
That's a good question. Yeah, real good question. Actually, the key to it is the blending process, and in that blending process, the house develops a style, and that house style is consistent generally from year to year with their variations due to vintage, climate, and other influences. But that house style is based upon certain blending of grapes, and also a certain blending of vintages, which we'll probably get into later. So again, it's more indicative of a house style, what grapes are actually used in the blend, than anything else.
Okay. Rhonda, you're so quiet.
Oh, I know. It's unusual.
It was unusual. You're the bubbly one at the table.
I'll get there.
Okay.
When we open the port.
Well, no, once we start drinking.
Well, let's do that.
Let's have a little bit. Let's show people what port actually looks like.
Absolutely.
And then we'll get into the types, the ones you're going to see on a menu.
Absolutely.
Because there's nothing like saying I'd like a tawny 20-year-old. It just sounds
It
dirty.
sounds dirty, doesn't it?
I think too, food pairings. We talked about chocolate, but there are so many other things that port goes with, like hard cheese, nuts,
Fruits.
It doesn't have to just be chocolate. We have a lot of customers that order port with their cheese course.
Right. Yeah, port's very good with cheese. I remember port wine cheese when I was a kid in the
right.
suburbs.
I forgot about that.
Did they make that? I'm quite the cheese aficionado, and I don't remember the last time I
haven't seen that in
saw
a
port
long
wine
time.
cheese.
Believe it or not, they do still make a Port Salut, which actually is a very fine cheese that actually is aged and rubbed with port wine. So it picks up a little bit of that nuttiness, a little bit of that raisinate that you get over time when port ages. Sort of what this one's like.
Would you dessert or cheese? That's when I'm going to let you speak to the food aspect of it
Dessert,
right
cheese,
now.
or fruit as well.
Okay.
Any of those, and even nuts. So.
Or sitting on the corner in front of CBG
Or that.
out of the
yeah,
bottle.
any of the above. Any of the above. Port can be enjoyed by itself or with those kinds of foods, but we typically see it with the chocolate and the cheese is probably the most common.
Right.
Yeah, it's fairly versatile depending upon the type that you get. White ports in Britain are served a lot of times as aperitifs, and then a lot of times you'll see a tawny port sometimes served as an aperitif too. Although I think there's a little bit too much alcohol, but some people do.
This is just a beautiful. I don't know how much
beautiful
color that you guys can pick up. Maybe get my ugly face out of the way of it. But it's like it's almost hard. It's got an orange. I don't know. I'm bringing this to my hairstylist and asking him to do my port next time. But it's got a very rich, deep, almost orangey red color to it. Incredibly sweet nose. You almost wouldn't sense how much alcohol is in there when you smell it.
Agreed.
And then it's amazing. What are you looking for when you look for a port? Would you like some, Rhonda?
Yeah, there you go. Well, in tawny ports, basically you're looking for a deep hue, nice color. If it's been open for a while, you'll taste that it's like we talked about when we talked about oxidized wines. Since a lot of times they're ordered by the glass in a restaurant, you'll notice that the mouthfeel isn't as clean as we noticed it. It'll be a little scratchy, and that's because that oxidization starts to impact the glycerin in the wine and makes it not very palatable. But typically these wines will last. A particular wine of this quality will last about 2 months once you open it. So generally, when you're tasting port wine, if it's going to be something like a tawny port, you're going to be fine. because most restaurants will sell through it in less than 2 months. So what you're looking for is balance, not too much acid, not too much alcohol, good depth of flavor in terms of the fruit, caramel notes. You're going to get some raisin notes. You're going to get a little bit of cinnamon sometimes too, and that's what you're really looking for in the quality of the wine itself.
What about the aging?
Well, I want to start right now. I want to go through the types of ports. The original, these are the ones I see all the time that I feel, what I try to do on this show all the time is show people the basics.
Mainstream.
You're going to find a lot of different words out there, and I'm not going to make anybody out there an expert on any topic. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to teach you a few things that you understand. A, you can impress the crap out of your friends or whoever you're there with by knowing 4 or 5 words, and B, it gives you the confidence to go out there and try these things and know what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to throw up a couple categories, and we'll run them down, and then I'm going to walk you through them. You can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, because I see differing things online all the time, and some of what I hear may be wrong. But can we throw that up there, Jacob? So most popular styles that I see, we have the bottle-aged ports that come in either ruby, vintage, or late bottle vintage. Those are the 3 that I see quite frequently. And then barrel-aged ports, and the most popular barrel-aged that I see is tawny.
Absolutely.
I want to start with barrel-aged.
Sure.
That means that I love it when the words make sense. You have the wine with the brandy-like substance there, sitting there, and you age it in a barrel.
Absolutely.
And at this point, we're no longer talking about things the way that a wine works. It's almost more the way that a liquor works, that a whiskey works. It's absorbed. I mean, it's it's stopped fermenting. It is now just aging and absorbing taste and moving like that.
Oxidizing a little bit.
Oxidizing,
to some degree. Exactly,
right.
which gives you complexity. No, good point. Yeah, these tawny ports, basically, it's a broad category. And in essence, by pure definition, by the Instituto de Vinho de Porto, which is in essence the governing body in Portugal, requires that these wines be aged for a minimum of 3 years. The problem with only a 3-year aging process is that it still mimics way too much a ruby port or something like a vintage port, even though it's not vintage.
Should I have started with the other ones?
No, not at all. No, not at all. Please, no, because these tend to be the most.
Tawny is what you see.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm looking at a restaurant, it's it's tawny 10-year or 20-year or 30-year, and that's
they're more approachable. These wines, these ruby ports, the vintage ports have to age for 15 years generally before you can drink them. And only 1% of all ports are ruby port.
So the tawny does all of its aging in the cask. The other ones that we're talking, the bottle aged, which we'll get to. I mean, the difference is you can either leave it in the cask and let it age for 10, 15, 20 years, or you can leave it in the cask for 18 months and then you can throw it in a bottle and let it do its aging in a bottle. We should have done that as the first thing. I screwed up with not saying that. So there's the difference. So
that's spot on. So what you're trying to do with this wine is make it mimic this wine 15 years from now. And you're doing it early on when you're going through the aging process.
Because when you take the bottle aged, which are not the tawnies, the rubies are very young when you put them in the bottle.
Absolutely.
They come out extremely early from the cask, a year and a half, 2 years.
Up to 3, yeah.
Up to 3 years. You shove them in a bottle, and they're pretty much done. That's a ruby. The vintage is when, as I understand it, much like in wine, when you find a really good year.
Absolutely.
When you say, because normally with whiskeys, for example, you don't say 2001 was a good year. You say it's been aged 15 years, just don't worry about it.
We drink it, right?
So that is sort of how the tawnies work. It doesn't matter what year the grapes were born, it matters how long they aged.
Exactly.
When you get to vintages in the bottle age, that's when they say, wow, these grapes were really good this year. Screw this. We're going to treat this more like wine than we're going to treat it like whiskey.
Absolutely correct.
And you put something aside and you went, 1997, you write it on the damn barrel and you go, you're just sitting there. But when something is that good, you might want to spend 20, 30 years to bring it to fruition.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that would be your vintage, which is bottle aged, takes a very long time from very select grapes.
Exactly. Yeah, those vintage ports basically are, as you were talking about, they're from declared vintages. What they mean by declared is that actually it's in the absolute best vintages, which typically for a port house only happens maybe 3 times a decade. They have to actually present their wine to the Instituto de Vinho de Porto, and they determine whether or not they're allowed to declare the vintage, and then the house is allowed to. Typically, they're aged in oak only they can age them by law to July 1st of 2 years from the vintage date, actual harvest, or up to June 30th of the following year, the third year after the harvest. And then what they're doing, what you do at that point is allow it to bottle age or sit in the bottle and gain those complexities, gain that weight, gain that structure, because of the cork that's actually here would allow oxidization of this wine over time.
So if again, I like to oversimplify things, and I apologize.
No,
but
please.
so it's like you pick up a bunch of grapes, right? And you go, okay, these grapes are good. Every 5 years, I get some grapes that are great.
Yep.
You good grapes, 4 years out of 5, we're going to shove you into a barrel, and we're going to let you get good in the barrel. We're going to let the barrel give you some character.
Yep.
You grapes that are great, you're not going to spend a lot of time in the barrel. You're going to get a little time in the barrel, and then you are going away for a long, long time in the bottle, and you're going to become even more great.
100% correct.
Is that?
That's a good way to say it.
So to simplify the whole process, is exactly what it is. And that really defines the difference between what we call vintage ports and all of the wood-aged ports. It
now
really is.
Then you have that early vintage, which I think is something like where they get the good grapes, but they're rushing it. They don't want to spend the time. So they're like, you're pretty good. You might be able to be a Super Bowl player if you were to spend
Just
another
a little more
couple
time,
years
yeah.
in college, but you need the paycheck, so let's get your ass
get
out
you
of
out
the
of it.
booth right now.
Fast track.
Yeah,
We need
so-
a paycheck, exactly.
Yeah, those are the we need a paycheck.
That's actually a really good.
Right?
That's a really good term, because what happens is some of these processes, particularly these types of processes in these tawny ports. I mean, you're talking about a wine that's in some cases 40 years is the average age of the blended ports in that wine. That means it spent 40 years in waiting. So you gotta get out of those gates and get some money into.
So yeah, it's sort of like you can have the mediocre grapes, and
Yep.
we'll spend 40 years
Yep.
on them. You can have the great grapes, and we'll spend 30, 20 years on them. Or we could take the great grapes and get them out early, and they'll be better than the mediocre 40-year. You know, so those are really, that seems to me like the three general distinctions. If people want to, again, if you just want to explain it to your friends over some drinks in a bar,
That's an easy way to explain it. I think it's a very good way to explain it, actually.
what I find interesting, and I think different than Scotch, if I understand it correctly, is that when you're talking about a tawny, which of course doesn't have a year of vintage, but it does tell you how old it is. And a tawny will say 20 years, but as I understand it, that's an average of the grapes that were put in it. Now in Scotch, if somebody says a 12-year Scotch, even if it's a blended Scotch, the youngest Scotch in there has to be at least 12 years.
That's correct. You're absolutely
That's why, for example, a lot of the Johnny Walker Blue doesn't have a year amount in it because it may be mostly 40-year Scotch, but they may put some 10 in it just to balance it out. So they don't put a year.
Absolutely.
But in Scotch, very important, the number is the youngest. In tawny ports, the number is an average,
yeah.
right?
And it's just by law in tawny ports, at least if they're going to list an age, it has to be 10, 20, 30, or 40. By law, that's it. That's the universe. And it's an average, and it's also an approximate average. They allow some variability out, obviously.
So if it averages out to
39.5.
38, it's going to be a 40 rather than a 30.
Exactly.
You know?
No one's going to come in and arrest you.
So apparently the Portuguese not quite as uptight as the Scotch.
Agreed, 100% on that one. Not as quite uptight as the French either. So, but that's a whole other discussion. Exactly.
So there is this dominion of our, origin has to be defined in order for you to call it port. In America, we don't care much about that. Can you get a good wine? Is it like champagne? In champagne, if it's made in America and it says champagne, I know it's crap. Because a good American wine producer will call it sparkling wine out of respect to the term.
Yep.
Is port the same way? Can I get something from Australia, something from the United States that has the word port on it, which is obviously breaking the Portuguese law? Does that automatically mean it's crap, or are there good ports that are not from Portugal?
There are some good ports that are not from Portugal, from California, actually.
And they use the phrase
They use
port.
the term port. They really do use the term port. And I think that's only because it's sort of like Paul Masson will sell the wine before it's time. But the Hardy Burgundy and stuff like that they really bastardized the names and created a problem for the French relative to those types of wines. But because we're talking about a fortified wine, and also when we think about dessert wines, particularly how we drink most of these ports, a lot of times the more alcohol we can actually produce because of the ripeness, the sweet of this wine can taste. Of course, especially if we stop it early when there's more sugar available. And if that's what we're looking for, certainly California can do a very good job because the ripeness levels, because of the climate in California, is so opportune for grape growing, a little more than Portugal. You can actually get some really good ripeness, which means some really good port-style wines, actually.
What are the brands that people should be looking for? I mean, because I see the same brands almost all the time when I'm looking at a even decent port. Ports are not, unless you go to a restaurant that specializes in them, you're going to see, in a very good restaurant, you're going to see 6 to 12 ports maybe, unless you're in a restaurant known for ports. And I tend to see the same brands all the time, but what are the brands that people should be looking for?
Sure, absolutely. You know, based on heritage that we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of the British involved, they like these wines so much that so many of the houses actually developed along British lines. So, for instance, Taylor Fladgate. It sounds British because that is a British name. Right. Very, very good port house, extremely good. And Dow's, which is what we have, Wars actually, that's also a British name. And also a very good house, Dow's, very good house as well. Fonseca, which is a typical Portuguese port house.
And I would say Fonseca is what I'm going to see at least 3 versions of, 4 versions of in almost any restaurant that has ports. You're going to have, your 10, your 20, maybe your 30, and then they've got a bin number something. Right? What's that mean when it says
that's a ruby port.
That's actually a ruby?
That's a ruby. And they also have a late bottle vintage port, which basically means they take a vintage port with a vintage date, which isn't good enough to be vintage port, and age it just a little bit longer, typically 4 and 6 years. And then introduce it so it's gained some complexity. Right. It's not the same as vintage port, but it's also gained some better complexity.
Is that the most popular? Is Fonseca the most popular port in the United States?
Probably the most popular house that in the U.S. Fonseca and Taylor Fladgate, and I think that's probably due to the fact that they've been producing some very, very good vintage ports as of late. In 1994, they had an outstanding vintage. Both of them got 100-point ratings for both of their wines in most of the journals. So they're recognized as being extremely good vintage port houses. And then you have Dow's, which is also recognized, Churchill's, Churchill's, and a whole host of others.
What's the holy grail of ports? What is the the Louis the whatever of ports?
A lot of people will, in terms of price, there's a producer, Quinta do Novo, and they produce a single vineyard vintage port. That carries a very high price point, and it's known as probably one of the zeniths in port making.
And what's that going to cost me in a nice restaurant?
$200. Well, in retail, a good vintage of Quinta do Novo in the single vineyard bottling, $200 to $250. So in a restaurant, a bottle.
Okay.
In a restaurant
per glass.
$60 probably somewhere.
Will they serve it by the glass?
They would,
restaurant?
yeah, because they do last. They do last a couple of months. Now that's an actual vintage port. So the time that it will last also depends on the vintage dates, the amount of time it's actually spent in the bottle. The older, the more delicate. But those will dissipate fairly quickly.
Ports
you'll find it in maybe a very high-end restaurant, Joe Robuchon, Paris, possibly. But other restaurants, probably not.
Ports generally are sold by the glass, not by the bottle, right? In your restaurant, do you guys sell it by the glass or by the bottle?
Yeah, mostly by the glass.
Well, mostly by the glass, but they can always buy the bottle. Right.
It's a little sweet and a little strong to be drinking an entire bottle of it after
a little bit goes a long way.
Right?
No one's going to bogart it. Let's just say that. That's for sure.
It's typically about a 2.5-ounce pour is a normal serving.
Pretty much what we had in our glasses today is a typical serving.
And the ports that you serve by the glass in your restaurant, what's the price range?
It's $14 actually, and we actually serve a 20-year Tawny, generally Fonseca, sometimes Taylor Fladgate, and I think it's a very favorable price point. We introduce it to a lot of folks that way, and they really enjoy it. It's very versatile in terms of desserts. It really is.
California, is there anything you would recommend on the California?
There's a few producers that actually make good California ports. But these are just the best. Yeah. These are the best wines. The grapes are indigenous to the area. The process has been tried and true since the early 1700s, even before that, but that's actually the origins of known vinicultural areas. It's the third oldest vinicultural area in the world, only behind Chianti and Tokai in Hungary.
And I think they weren't even certified. I think this is the oldest certified one, and something like that. Now we're getting into geek terms.
We'll skip that.
Oh my God, we lost them.
We'll skip that.
Guys, this has been a wonderful conversation about ports. I need to move on to a couple of emails, and hopefully, as restaurateurs and wine fans, you'll be able to chat with me. And I think a couple of these will strike close to home with you.
Okay.
So
Absolutely.
I need, first of all, an apology for last week. We're going to kick this off to the folks at Lombardi's. I think watching the show, Lombardi's Pizza in New York, I think I said it opened in 1915, and I'm pretty certain it actually opened in 1905. So let's get that out of the way.
Did it?
Now, as far as another apology that I owe, and this one comes from an email question. When John Curtis was up here, we started chatting, and he started bad-mouthing farming shrimp here in Las Vegas. And I got into the idea that, you know, most shrimp farms are horrible, and John gets my goat. And when he said something about the Gulf, I made a snide comment like, that's what I want, a bunch of oiled covered shrimp, or something like that. And when it was coming out of my mouth, I felt bad about it. One of my viewers called me on it. The truth of the matter is, as much as I hate the way in which BP raped our environment and destroyed a lot of aquaculture down there, there is some incredible seafood and some incredible shrimp coming out of the Gulf right now. My good friend Rick Moonen has been down there to encourage those producers and to support what they're doing. I apologize for bad-mouthing it. Just, you should keep me away from John Curtis. You guys, you consume a lot of shrimp in your restaurant. You use Gulf shrimp?
Yeah, we were just in New Orleans and ate shrimp and crab meat everywhere, and always delicious.
Yeah, we were there last
so
week,
it's
actually.
back in full force.
Yeah.
New Orleans restaurant scene is amazing right now.
So my bad on that one, okay? And thanks a lot for the viewer who was cool enough to make me point that out, because those are people that I really do want to support down there.
Absolutely.
And great, great, wonderful shrimpers down there doing great jobs.
Absolutely.
And trying to bring the region back to where it should be, one of the food capitals of America.
Absolutely.
Before
Yeah.
Katrina, I would always say I used to think, New York and San Francisco were the top two, and Vegas was fighting with New Orleans to be like the number 3 food city in America.
agree.
And that's not the way I wanted to take the number 3 position, I could assure you. So hats off to all of you people down at the Gulf, seriously. And finally, one question, and I think you might be able to shed some light on this, and this is coming from Cheryl. It says, hi Al, last week on your show, you mentioned that Bread and Butter is open to doing pop-ups. I hadn't heard that term until Anthony Bourdain's recent San Francisco episode, and I didn't know that there were pop-ups in Vegas. How do you find out about them? First of all, to define the term one more time for anybody out there, it's not just a restaurant term. I mean, it's been used, I know record stores that have done it. I know it was even on that really bad show, Two Broke Girls, recently. But it's basically about a store or a business that just pops up for 24 hours or however long in a location that it doesn't normally happen. And in the restaurant industry, a pop-up is when a chef will go someplace out of his own element. It could be another restaurant. It could be a food truck. It's usually a very well-known, very famous chef, and he goes out and does something really cool for one night only. There's a great one coming up with my friend Jet Tila at Origin India. You can find that on my website, the details on that, but that's coming up in early February, and hopefully Jet is going to be in here to talk about that. So you are also having a big pop-up, right?
Well,
Actually, we had one with Jet Tila.
We had one with Jet
about 2 months ago.
Tila, and that was a learning experience, and that's when I figured out a lot of people didn't know what the word pop-up meant here. But in Los Angeles, for example, it's everywhere. Pop-ups are going on everywhere in the LA scene. So
But
really,
didn't I see that you have something
and we
coming
have,
up with Mr. Strati?
well, he's part of our team, so
Right.
it's not really a pop-up. He's regular. We have a wine dinner coming up on February 1st.
But he's not in the kitchen
with
every
Chateau
day.
Montelena.
Is he
He's in the
gonna be
kitchen
there?
quite
Is he?
often. Absolutely.
Okay.
He's
But
in
we
the
do have
kitchen
one
quite
coming up with
often.
Luciano
But
Pellegrini.
Luciano
Okay, maybe
Pellegrini.
that's the one you were telling me about. I'm
That's-
sorry, I got your
Yeah, we have a
email
couple of
about
things.
it.
Yeah.
We had a lot of $500 champagne the
Right,
other night.
we did. But Luciano Pellegrini, we don't have the firm date, but we're thinking March, end of March. So that'll be fun because we're really a French bistro. He's Italian. He'll come over to our kitchen and we'll be doing some Italian food, just like we did.
A lot too.
Yeah.
Just like we did with Asian with Jet Tila. So it's a
Absolutely.
lot of fun.
Luciano, an amazing chef. If anybody follows me on Facebook or whatever, he made me brains 3 ways the
We
other
heard,
day.
right,
It
yes,
was
yeah,
it was-
very adventurous.
It was great. But
So it's a lot of fun.
To answer Cheryl's question, rather than just plug events, but I mean, that's what it is. Cheryl, honestly, this is how you find out about pop-ups. It's shows like this, webcasts. You're not going to really find them a little more in the mainstream press sometimes from time to time in the media. But what pop-ups are really about is the foodie equivalent of a flash mob, you know, where it gets out there through social media. If you want to know about the ones that I know about here in Las Vegas, not to plug it, but please check my website, almancini.net. If you want to find out, like Marche Bacchus, which has quite a few pop-ups, then you would, of course, just register to be on your mailing list. And
also follow, I would say follow the Facebook pages of any chefs that you really like. Because, for instance, Jatila has a huge Facebook following, and he communicated it that way. I think Luciano Pellegrini will do the same. So if you like certain chefs and you want to see what they're doing, I would make sure you're up on their page.
Yeah, you want to be following the right people on Twitter. You want to be looking at everybody's Facebook page. You want to be, if you're here in Las Vegas, you want to be reading what Max Jacobson, Brock Radke, Jim Bagley, myself, John Curtis, Nikki New, Grace Bascos. I mean, these are the local foodies. And sadly, I would love to say Heidi Ranella, but she wouldn't know what a pop-up was if it popped up and hit her in the face. But if you follow the rest of us here in Las Vegas, follow your favorite chefs, your favorite food magazines, make sure you're looking at their Twitter feeds. It's just one of those things where or it's like a rave. You have to know the right people, you know?
It's an underground club scene, exactly.
Yeah, it is an underground scene. Sometimes people give as much as a month's notice, sometimes a week's notice. You know, another friend of mine who does pop-ups here in Las Vegas is our good friend of the show, Chef Vic Vegas. I would be following him on Twitter if you're here in town. I would be following Rumor, where he used to work, because he likes to go there and do stuff. Follow your favorite restaurants, follow your favorite chefs. They don't want everyone coming to these things. They want the people who know the restaurant, who know the winery, who know the chefs. That's what they're really looking for. So that's the best pop-up advice I can give you. In the meantime, there will be a lot popping up at my brunch on Sunday.
Or popping out.
With the beautiful ladies of Joanna Angel, all of the ladies. I'm not going to go into detail about it. One more time, my porn star brunch with Burning Angel at First Food and Bar. There's still some tickets available. Call First Food and Bar. You get to hang out with porn stars. Tons of good food, tons of booze, reasonable price. You guys are coming, right?
We are going to be there. We can't wait.
Yes.
It's going to be fun.
We're definitely going to be there.
I'm hoping next week we'll be talking Thai food, but I'm not 100% certain. In the meantime, just follow everything that's going on, almancini.net, at Almancini Vegas on Twitter. You're at top of the food chain. This is the Vegas Video Network, your home of every damn cool thing in Las Vegas. I'll see you next week.